Time to start taking a look at external free agency for the Pacers by going position by position. Today, we start with point guards. Could the Pacers need one? If they do, who are the best players on the market and who makes the most sense? We'll run through them all today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Saturday and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today it's June. It's a new month, and you're getting one more bonus pod before we go back to 5 days a week because I missed one day in May, and I'm making it up to you today officially. And I got the email from the league that no finals coverage for me because the team I covered didn't make it, which makes a lot of sense, which means it's the perfect time to deliver some more off-season content, including free agency. 2 days ago, we talked about the Pacers offseason from their own perspective and their own free agents and how they might pursue those guys and what the considerations are there. Yesterday, we talked about the Pacers' resources, their salary cap situation, what they can do to get better, how they can tweak their team and the timelines. Now, we look at the external stuff. If the Pacers are going to add players, who could it be? What makes sense? What fits into their constraints and budgets and is actually possible? And I have found through the years, the best way to do that is position by position. That way, even if it's a surprise where the Pacers sign their best fit or a player you don't expect, you've covered them, or at least you've covered why they might sign someone at that position. No one thought the Pacers should be tripping all over themselves to get Bruce Brown, but at least we mentioned it on this podcast last year before it happened. The reasoning was laid out. No one thought the Pacers needed a center in 2018-19. They went and got Kyle O'Quinn the very next summer after they drafted Aaron Holiday. No one thought they needed a point guard. They got TJ McConnell, right? Like you can go on and on through the many times that it positionally hasn't felt like the biggest need, and yet it's still something they do, and the reasons often turn out to be very sound or okay, and that's why I like doing it this way. So we start today with point guards, and I did that lead up because I think everybody knows the Pacers, if you had to rank the positions in which they need a player the most, point guard would be last, right? I expect several comments on this video of people who didn't listen to the first 2.5 minutes of the episode that say, why are we talking about point guards? Well, I just explained it, so now I can ignore your comments forever. So let's actually run through this position, right, and what it means. And so as it stands, very easily to break down the depth chart here. The Pacers have Tyrese Haliburton under contract for 5 more years. They have Andrew Nembhard under contract for the coming season and potentially beyond, and they have TJ McConnell under contract for the season. That's 3 point guards. That's a lot of time. So if they needed another one, why would that even be the case, right? Because first glance, looking back at last season, there were only in the regular season 116 minutes that the Pacers played with none of those 3, McConnell, Nembhard, and Haliburton, on the floor. 20 minutes in the postseason, but all of those minutes were garbage time with Jarris Walker in the game. So not real minutes. In the regular season, at least, there was some very small amount of real minutes without one of those 3 guys on the floor, one of their 3-point guards. But let's be clear about this. 20 of those 116 minutes. So almost 1/6 of them, almost over 16% of them, were Bruce Brown on the floor early in the season when McConnell was getting DNPs for the first couple days or couple games, and when Nembhard's role was different every so often before he became a permanent starter. Bruce Brown occasionally filled in as the backup point guard, and there was a small stretch for like 2 weeks where Haliburton was hurt and Bruce Brown hadn't been traded yet. So there is 20 minutes of him in with none of those 3 guards. You subtract that out and you have 96 minutes the entire season with none of those point guards on the floor. That probably answers the question I'm asking here of, do they need someone at this position? No, right? Usually what their choice was last year in these minutes was a combination of, or just one of the following. Ben Mathurin running the show, right? Their most used lineup without any of Bruce Brown, McConnell, Nembhard, or Tyrese Haliburton on the floor was 8 minutes of Ben Shepherd, Jarris Walker, Ben Mathurin, Jalen Smith, and Obi Toppin. So a young bench group that didn't have a point guard but had enough ball handling with Mathurin and Walker to get by. Their next group had Oscar Tshiebwe, so clearly kind of like a garbage time group. And so a couple of the next ones are actually garbage time groups. And then the third most used one, this one's actually real, is Ben Shepherd, Ben Mathurin, Buddy Hield, Obi Toppin, and Myles Turner. And Hield, if you remember, played a little more ball handling this year because he had that summer with the Bahamas where he got to play point guard a little bit for them. So this is too in the weeds to say, even last year, it's very easy to point at the Pacers and say there was no need. They had the right amount of point guard depth. They did not need more. They had another point guard on the team. Isaiah Wong was on the roster and played 4 minutes the whole season, right? They didn't need him ever. And Nembhard missed time, right? He missed some time early in the season, was in and out, and then got hurt during the in-season tournament semifinals and missed a couple games. And they didn't need to fill in. They had Haliburton and McConnell. And then Haliburton missed time, and they rode with Nembhard, and they rode with McConnell, and sometimes Siakam was like running the show, and we just went through some of the other groups. Like they had enough. So just on that exercise alone, the only reason they would squint and say they need someone is if they're expecting worse injury luck at the position. That's just the start of their current situation, right? Haliburton's missed over 10 games in each of the last 2 seasons. Nembhard's missed some time each of his 2 years, although not very much. McConnell is usually an Iron Man, although he had the wrist injury a few years ago, which is not an injury-prone player thing. So if they thought they were going to miss significant time with one of those, and particularly McConnell or Haliburton, because Nembhard doesn't play the point all the time, then I think maybe they'd sniff around like the 15th guy or a two-way slot, but I don't even think that they care about that because Siakam can run the show, or maybe they're fine with Jarris or Mathurin doing it. So to me, just on what they have right now, they would not pursue a point guard in free agency. But one, that is just pure inside the box thinking about a point guard. And two, that does not account for the fact that they might not have all 3 of those guys to start next season. Now, I don't think they would trade any of those 3, but you never know. You just never know what the situation's going to be. Maybe there's an A-list star out there that's available and is willing to come to the Pacers, and Nembhard has to be in the trade package. Maybe some team blows the Pacers away with an offer from McConnell. That would be a way that's kind of unforeseeable and unpredictable and more outside of at least the Pacers' control. But it's still a reality that exists. The other thing, and this is something I talk about at this position every year, every time since they've gotten Haliburton, this is the third one of these now, right? The summer of 22, 23, and 24 that we've talked about point guard free agency, knowing that they have Haliburton on the team and McConnell for all those. And so it's not the most important position. Here's where it matters, and we'll talk about a lot of these guys, is point guards that are point guards. They often guard point guards, but they're good at other stuff. Like they can guard wings, or they're really tall, or they're good at rebounding. Any number of things that make sense or are possible are other reasons to pursue someone at this position. And that's how you end up with some names that we're going to say today, or some names on other teams in the NBA, like the Warriors ended up with a very good other point guard, even though they had Steph Curry on their team and Corey Joseph on their team entering the season. They had lots of point guards on their team, right? It's a reality. So, and one of those guys is coming up today who was on that Warriors team. So that is the point guard outlook to me in free agency for the Pacers. If you made me say how much resources they should put into this position, nothing. The minimum would be the answer, maybe just a two-way to fill or keep Isaiah Wong's spot. But I'll give you the options later after we run through the best players at the position and figure out, does any of this make any sense for the Pacers? Before we get to that, though, really quickly, I have to talk to you guys about PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app that has more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action. You just pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll. And you can get in on the playoff action in the NBA or the NHL. Win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks. You can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. You turn $10 into $1,000 with basketball, hockey entries today on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app, where it's simple to play. You can make your picks in a minute or less, and it's super simple, quick withdrawals, easy gameplay. For example, you just look at it and say, do I think Caitlin Clark's going to have more than or less than 20 points? Or do I think Jason Tatum's going to have more than or less than 7.5 rebounds? That's how you play. You pick 2 to 6 player stat projections and try to win. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, that's download the app PrizePicks and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We are back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today. and every single day here on the weekend. Make your second listen either Locked On Mavs or Locked On Celtics to get prepped for the finals. Lots of time to go. It's not till Thursday, but the earliest previews of the series from those two are coming out. I'm looking forward to the crossover episode between those two. Love talking with John and Nick, two of my faves of the network. I've hung out with them in real life several times. I'm sure they'll do a great job covering the finals. Fun finals. Looking forward to talking about it myself if I get a chance and watching it, of course. So we've established the Pacers' need for a point guard is low. Do any of the good players at this position are probably out? Is anyone so good that if they became available, the Pacers would think about like a team identity change or some sort of rickety, could we get away with this guy and that guy together lineup? No, not really. The position is not very strong at the top of free agency this year. There's guys I like. There's not anybody who makes sense next to Tyrese Haliburton or in lineups that make a lot of sense, right? The guys who made the most money last year entering free agency at this position, there's 4 who made more than $10 million per year on their last deal. That's Kyle Lowry, D'Angelo Russell, Markelle Fultz, and Tyus Jones. None of those guys make sense on the Pacers to me unless Kyle Lowry is done playing and is just like a James Johnson role kind of guy. But so the problem with D'Angelo Russell specifically, and maybe Tyus Jones in the right situation, is they'll make more than the mid-level exception. And we've already said the Pacers shouldn't be using a ton of resources on this position. If any, why would they use their biggest tool to add a player? So if the player's already going to make more than that, they're out. The Pacers can't get him anyway. But they don't need any of those guys. None of them. I mean, Russell kind of fits next to other good ball handlers because he's a really good shooter. That really evolved for him last year. But for the Pacers specifically, it makes a lot less sense if the ball's out of his hands at his defensive level to bring him in. And that's the only 4 guys who were really expensive last year. That doesn't mean they're the best guys on the market, but the top players at the point guard position are just not really good fits for the Pacers in free agency this year. The next crew is something like Monty Morris, Reggie Jackson, Kyra Lewis, Russell Westbrook, Patrick Beverley, Gary Payton II. We will talk about Gary Payton II more in the next segment. So like Patrick Beverley is a guy that I'll stop and talk about for a second. Like the Pacers do need defense in a world where they needed a 5th guard to play at all, right? To go out there and guard. Then maybe that is the type of thing they would consider is a Patrick Beverley type and then have Haliburton, McConnell, Nembhard, Beverley, and whoever else as your 5 guards that soak up minutes. But they have Mathurin and Shepherd operating at these positions too, so they don't have minutes available really at the 2-guard spot either, right? They already have 5 guards feasibly on their team ready for playing time under contract next season, right? So even guys with unique skill sets and abilities that could provide value at those positions aren't valuable to the Pacers necessarily, or have less value to them than other teams just because of the infrastructure the Pacers already have. So even those niche guys like Beverly who have the skill the Pacers would want at this position aren't that great. I use Spotrac, and I should have said this earlier, for the whole series. That is how I'm defining positions. So if you think I haven't said someone who is a point guard, they probably are listed at a different position. We'll get to them later. And if you think I say somebody who's not a point guard, well, they're listed as a point guard in these lists. I said say Tyrese Maxey's next. He is, I guess, a point guard, but he is the best player. If he somehow is available and the Pacers can get him, yes, they should just try and then figure out the fit later. They can't get him. I love Emmanuel Quickly. Same deal. They just can't get him. Toronto's not going to let him get away. Very good player. Those are like the actually high upside, very, very good player point guards on the market. Everyone else is either, maybe D'Angelo Russell's a starter. Maybe Kyle Lowry's a starter. Like, it's not a good market for high-end level point guards that are going to even be obviously available. That's kind of how this free agency period has shooken out at a couple positions. Very weird class. It's a very odd time. If you're looking for some upside swings, if you're looking for some unique players, this could be the summer for you. I love Jordan McLaughlin, for example, not for the Pacers, but on the market in general. I love Jose Alvarado. There's no way he's leaving New Orleans, but you get the gist. There's some unique stuff. Spencer Dinwiddie's okay. Dylan Wright's okay, but there's nothing that really jumps out for even point guard needy teams that need depth at the spot. And so if you're the Pacers who don't need depth at the spot, you could either just ignore it completely or just wait until this market is a bunch of desperate guys who haven't gotten a job yet. And if you want one, you get them for the minimum. But what really matters is there anyone at this position? Are there any actual guys who are listed as a point guard here who do make sense for the Pacers, who actually fit what they need or could have a role on this team in a not that crazy scenario, I actually can come up with a few. I'll explain that to close out this bonus weekend, Locked On Pacers. And we're back here on Locked On Pacers. Thanks for making us your first listen today and every single day here on the weekend. Short second segment there, so hopefully this next one's a little longer. Closing out with some actual targets at this position that, again, the Pacers probably will not prioritize at all, barring trades this summer. Listen to Locked On NBA for your second listen because Wes Goldberg and I chopped it up on the most recent episode about the finals. We got lucky that we got the night the Mavs won and secured what the series would be, so we get to look ahead at the final series, the Mavs season, the Wolves offseason, all sorts of fun stuff there. I love chatting with Wes. So, actual names that I think make sense. As I said, to me, if the Pacers are going to sign a point guard or someone who's listed as a point guard on this or someone with a past as a point guard, whatever, they had to be able to do, because Haliburton's going to have the ball all the time. And when he doesn't, McConnell does. And when McConnell doesn't, Siakam does, right? And when he doesn't, Nembhard does. And then Turner and Nesmith also exist and Toppin. Like, they don't need guys to control the rock for them. Well, if they're going to sign someone at this position, it's going to be somebody who can give them a new skill or dimension in some way. There are some of those guys. I already mentioned one of them, right? Gary Payton II, Warriors last year, behind Steph. They also had Corey Joseph earlier in the season, and GP2 was hurt, right? He had that weird stuff go on with the Blazers injury. He only played 15 games for Portland last year. He only played 44 games for Golden State this season that just ended, right? So he does have a very injury-prone recent past. Has only played over 30 games in his whole career. He's only played more than 44 games once in his whole career, which is pretty wild. Good defender. Very scrappy, plays way bigger than 6'2", to the point that the Warriors played him at the 3, even on the positional play-by-play that Basketball Reference uses, which is largely just height. Tallest player to shortest is how they sort their positions. Gary Payton II, with that year he had with the Wizards, maybe the last year with the Wizards, plus his first year with the Warriors when they were very good, he was basically a wing, right? And so if you can be part point guard, part wing, that gives you something with the Pacers. Even if you're not in the rotation, you are one injury away at so many spots from playing. And for a veteran, that's valuable. Or for somebody looking to get a job, that's valuable. And the Pacers would guarantee someone's contract to play that role. They just did it. Doug McDermott was on their team as the 10th guy. He didn't play all the time, but they needed that. And if you can be a wing guy who provides some value with the skill, like I think Gary Payton II could, that is a point guard, air quotes, in theory, worth kind of exploring on the market. There's a couple guys that sort of fit that category as well. This one's really strange because he played for the Pacers before and is now a totally different player. That's Aaron Holiday. Aaron Holiday is short. So it's funny to describe him like this. But he, has really evolved as a shooter, right? He had that good season shooting his second season with the Pacers, and then that kind of dipped away. But 39% this past season, 40% the year before that, 44% with the Suns before that, 38% for his career. So he started slow with Indiana and then got it going from deep. So he's a good shooter, and he's become an actually okay wing defender. Not like big wings, he's 6 feet tall, but good enough on-ball perimeter defender against non-point guards that he basically became a 3-and-D wing with the Hawks and the Rockets last year. He'll definitely have a spot in the NBA because of that. So his height limits how serious you can be about like deploying him to guard all the time. But I think Aaron Holiday's become a defender worth exploring for some team. I definitely think he'll have a job next year. And similar to GP2, you know, if the Pacers can get a 3-and-D air quotes kind of guy at a point guard position, that is totally worth exploring. So those two fit that bill to me. The next guy is a Tony East crush. I've talked about him basically every summer. I've done the point guard show because he is a point guard and he's ginormous. And that's Delano Banton. Delano Banton is 6'9", and he never showed a lot before this past season, right? So Toronto, the first 2 years of his career, 3 points a game, barely shot over 40%, 5 points a game the next year, barely shot over 40%. The passing was never there. Started last season with Boston, wasn't playing very much, shot 37% for them. Oof, not very good. And then with the Blazers, still not that efficient, 40.8%. But the passing clicked a bit, way higher assist rate than he ever had before. I'm not talking per game. That's boring. I'm talking per minute, right? That's significant to see that kind of thing happen for him. And he needed that assist jump to kind of prove he can run the show. And 16.7 points per game. That is a factor of his minutes. And everybody remembers the insane games he had late in the season. 28-11 game for Golden State. I forget what the really high one was where everybody was going nuts about Delano Ban, but he closed the season scoring really well. Excuse me. I think he hit 30 more than once for Golden State. So it did click for him a little down the stretch of last season. And he's 6'9", which means he can guard a lot of positions. He's kind of rail thin, but that has a lot of value to me, and he can be not a point guard, right? Again, same thing as Gary Payton and Aaron Holiday. You sort on the play-by-play position estimate on Basketball Reference. He's got minutes at small forward in every season of his career because he's so tall that he's guarding wings. He can handle the ball. If there's a way that you could play 1, 2, 3, or even 4 if you're 6'9", although he's probably too thin for that, that is a point guard, air quotes point guard, worth exploring for the Pacers, especially if they feel like they need more ball handling for whatever reason in the offseason. Those are kind of the wing types or tall types that make sense. The other 3 point guards, I think, if the Pacers kind of pursued, I'd be like, okay, if they have this guy not playing, but he's a break glass in case of emergency play or whatever, that's anyone who can guard, anyone who can play any defense because they defended so poorly last year. They said they'd be looking for those traits, defense and rebounding, on the free agency market. If you can get those things for the Pacers, even if you're not playing, I suppose I could squint and say it makes sense. Again, I don't think they'll sign a point guard, but if they're going to, guys that make sense, guys that fit in their budget, that's what we're talking about here. 3 more. The worst of the 3 is just a guy I really like now, the way he's kind of evolved as a player. That's Dennis Smith Jr., finished last season with Brooklyn. Wasn't as good as he was the year before that with Charlotte, but has certainly evolved into a useful NBA player because he can guard and is a little bit more efficient now than he ever was before. And again, playing defense at this level, it matters. He's played for Carlisle before. So the defense is the big thing that makes Dennis Smith Jr., interesting to me, but a little shorter, 2-point guarding, not as much wing value there. Delon Wright, mentioned him earlier. Good player, did some good stuff for the Heat last season. After moving there from the Wizards, he can defend, and he's a little bigger. I think he's like 6'5", 6'6", so wing-sized again. Not as good as the wing defender, but a good perimeter defender in general. So that's always very valuable, and he's had a long career. He's a veteran. He knows what he's doing, right? Same kind of thing. If you know this guy can play 1, 2, and 3, a la Bruce Brown, then maybe you're okay bringing him in not as a 1, but as a guy who can be a break glass in case of emergency 1. And I just happen to think he's a good player. The last one who fits this bill on this list that I have is Chris Dunn. Chris Dunn almost was out of the league, fought like crazy to get back in. How did he do it? By guarding. Great defender now, much better than he was coming into the league. Remember, he had that crazy good summer league, and everybody thought he was going to be an awesome offensive player after being the 5th pick in that 2016 draft. Turns out that never materialized, but the defense is there now and much more efficient now than he used to be. Last 2 seasons shooting well from 2 and 3 with the Jazz, and his defense is valuable. He can kind of pass. He's on the shorter-ish side, although taller than some of the guys we talked about today. And again, because he can guard so many positions, logged some time at, air quotes, small forward for the Utah Jazz last year. If you catch the theme of what I'm saying, if you're a point guard who can guard your own position and also guard 2s very easily, that's already great. You can also guard 3s in a pinch, like Bruce Brown could, and like some of these guys I've mentioned can. That is where you become a person that the Pacers could say, I guess this makes sense for us. This is a wing who can also handle the ball. They can guard. And no one I've said so far is going to cost that much money. I guess Banton could cost something, but it seems like they would all be within the Pacers price range or even minimum guys in some of these players' cases. That's what they would, if they did end up signing a point guard this summer. Right now, that's what would make sense for them if they did it. But if they have McConnell, if they have Haliburton, if they have Nembhard, it doesn't make a ton of sense for them to pursue a point guard. If they need desperately ball handling or floor general skills, to me, they would turn to Siakam, assuming he's back. Otherwise, Jarris Walker, Ben Mathurin would be the break glass in case of emergency point guards. But if there's moves made, if there's an opportunity late in free agency, perhaps one of these names could be one of the ones that sneaks in. And every other position after this now will be more interesting because there's either better reason for the Pacers to pursue someone at that spot, or there's unlimited reasons to want a 2, 3, or 4 that are skilled and can play multiple positions. But point guards, that's the gist. And This is the third show in a row for me. I did point guards alone because it's going to be boring for other people. But all the rest of these will have a guest, every other position. Maybe I'll do centers by myself. Speaking of guests, 3 days in a row for me by myself. Sorry for that. We'll have a guest Monday talking the draft for the first time, the status of this draft, what the Pacers picks could net, how the middle of the draft shakes out, all sorts of stuff. They had their first draft workout on Friday, so it's a good time to dive into all that. And then next week, we'll get into some player free agencies for the Pacers, Pascal, Siakam. And I hope starting the player reviews next week, we'll see some coordination involved there. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. I am on Twitter at Tony R. East, and the show is there at Locked On Pacers. Hope you guys are having or had a great weekend. See you on Monday.